Three. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I am your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill. Today, we have another author interview today. My guest today is an American urban fantasy author, historian, freelancer, and content creator. She's written everything from flash fiction, inspirational books, full-length novels, and a published master's thesis on Henry IV of England. As a professional writer and fervent scholar, she has devoted more than a decade to studying, reading, writing, and breathing all things fiction. Joining us today for the first time on the podcast, let's give a warm welcome to author P L Riven. PL, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So, PL, what more can you tell us about your writing and your experience as a writer, freelancer, content creator, and more? What can you tell us?
Sure. So I have been writing since I was about 13. In sixth grade, my teacher looked me in the eyes and said, "Hey, this can be your career." So since that moment, I've wanted it and I've been working toward it. Um, I'm actually known for having really deep characterization and snappy dialogue and immersive storytelling. I love world building. It's like my favorite thing ever. Um, I have written several novels. Right now, I have two manuscripts that are complete. I'm working on a third one. One is in the beta reading stage, and the other is almost there. The editor has it right now. I have written, like you said, a lot of different types of things, but I'm pretty much honing in at this point on adult fantasy with a particular interest in urban fantasy. I have competed in competitions for flash fiction. I've placed first in my round there. I have also attended Futurescapes, which is a prestigious writing program. And I am going to be presenting at the Imaginarium this July for my very first workshop, which is going to be on characterization.
Wow. So you are very, very busy, which is good. I mean,
Yeah.
from what you've said and from what I've been researching on your website, you have been very, very busy. Flash fiction, poetry, your master's thesis, that's what really sold me. Looking at the master's thesis of Henry IV of England, I'm a big history lover, so that
Oh, nice.
instantly sold me. And why do you think you like these different genres? Because from all the authors that I've spoken with over this now year, they usually only focus on one style of writing. Either it's like full length novels or poetry, but you've kind of branched out into all genres of writing and all genres of like storytelling. Why is it? Like, what gravitates you towards not being pigeonholed to one style of writing?
I think that boils down to the fact that I am very strange. I am a weirdo. I am a massive nerd. So I have interests that are incredibly varied. My parents used to tease me about the fact that I would never find a career that encompassed all of my interest. I have a bachelor's degree in history. I also have a bachelor's degree in philosophy. I have a master's degree in history. And I have just loved to try different things. I'm not a kind of person that can pick one avenue and just stay with it. I enjoy really weaving those together. And I find that the more genres you try, the more conventions you're actually able to bring into the style that's your primary source.
Nice. I was just gonna say this. If you and I met in school, we would be best of friends because that's exactly how I am. I have a master's in history. I have a BA in Asian history. And yeah, just like you, I've read like a lot of different styles of books that's helped me kind of figure out what my voice is. And it is
Mhm.
very fascinating because it is like a lot of research reading these different types of books, not just fiction, but also nonfiction as well. And I don't think a lot of people really take that into consideration that that's another form of research is
Mhm.
how each author writes, how they write their characters, because it's vastly different.
Absolutely. I always laugh when people say I'm a fantasy writer, therefore I don't need to research. you need to research more than anybody because you're already asking your audience to buy into your premise. And if you don't have grounding in something that's at least plausible, you're going to lose them. And that's where I think that nonfiction is a really great opportunity to bring that in.
Definitely. Now, you mentioned before that you've been writing since you were 13 years old. Would you say that's kind of like the starting point that you believe that this could be something down the road for a possible future and career? Or did that come later after years and years of like fine tuning, like specifically what you wanted to do?
It was definitely when I was 13. My teacher, Miss Grace, if you're out there, I remember you. You were awesome. You put me on this path. She looked me in the eyes and she said, "This can be your career." And at the time, I wanted to be a lawyer, so I was kind of like, I don't know, maybe. And but I was hooked with Shakespeare. I became really interested in Shakespeare. I became really interested in Jane Austen. I tried a lot of different things that were similar to those styles, and I don't know. When I was 13, I remember sitting in that classroom in my literature class and knowing that people get paid to do this, and it just kind of blows my mind because this is fun. Like this, how can
Yeah.
somebody be paid to do this? And I kind of meandered a little bit. For a while, I wanted to go and be a professor, so I was going to get a PhD, and then COVID hit, and I was like, and I'd kind of already been working on some novels and it just hit the ground running. And over the last, I'd say 6 months, maybe 9 months, it has really like culminated into something that is a career. And people like you are finding me, which I'm just so flattered. Like I'm very excited to be here.
Thank you. And it's really nice too, because when I started this podcast back in the height of I don't say height of the pandemic, but I want to say like after 2022, that's when I started doing this podcast to like talk with all the writers in the community. I initially started this with just in my indie community from the friends I've met, but then the last few months ago of last year, I decided I'm going to branch out and meet a bunch of other people, not only indie writers but also academic writers, historian writers, and I can say that's been the best experience ever. And I always like finding new people to come to my channel because I am just so fascinated with just like the vast amount of talent all the writers have, because as writers we ultimately want to help each other. We're all trying to get our voice out. We all want to be known and heard, because writing is a very lonely business because you're just by yourself. You're putting hours and hours into work, which I'm sure you can agree with. Writing several flash fiction, poetry, and novels is a very lonely and very time consuming venture, but it's a very well worth venture, especially when you actually get it published and seeing the response that people are getting, which leads into a very important question. When you're writing for a particular audience or just a broad audience in general, what is the need or desire you want to satisfy your readers with? What do you ultimately want them to take away from your stories?
First, I want them to have fun. I think reading should be fun. I think that it is so sad. I have two kids. I homeschool them, but I remember going through school with my friends where we were forced to read books and they never wanted to pick up another one. I have friends that left high school and college and never read another book. So first, I want it to be fun. Second of all, I love to weave knowledge into my books, and leave people with little nuggets of truth and little nuggets to go jump down a rabbit hole. That's super fun. My very favorite thing, though, is taking real history, myth, and then stuff I make up and mixing it all together and finding out what people actually think is real. And most of the time, they don't know. And that is like, I feel like it's such magic. You're able to create something in a world that is fantastical and yet still have it grounded and approachable to other people. And you want others to start wanting to write and start trying to find outlets, because when you can identify with a story or a book, like it's more than just I'm entertained. It like can speak to your soul. Like you can remember Radetzky March is my favorite book ever. Now, please don't ask me what it's about because I cannot remember to tell you,
I
but I
won't.
remember it was my favorite book. And I always say that it is because I walked away just feeling so amazing reading that book. And when you can make somebody else, especially somebody you don't know, feel something that means something to them, and they look back on it and maybe it helps them get through something or it just reminds them of a time, I think that's a legacy. And I think who doesn't want that? I think that's wonderful.
Yes, I know I said this before. Yeah, you and I would definitely been friends in
Yes.
college because that's exactly the same way. For my writing, I love combining history, fantasy, mythology. One of the books I am in the process of trying to get published is a mix of religious myths and theology with a lot of the cultural myths around the world. I don't want to give too much detail because I want to save it, but what I can say is it follows a character, Michael, the warrior angel in
Mhm.
Christian and Judeo-Christian traditions, and he goes on this Lord of the Rings kind of quest
Yeah.
when the world's just gone under, and he's the last angel on Earth. And so now he has to find allies, but his allies aren't other angels. His allies are the other gods, the old gods of the
Mm.
world. So Horus, um, Sekhmet, a lot of Valkyries from Norse mythology, gargoyles. He has to get an army to try to save the world
Love
from
it.
the army of darkness. And that's all I'm going to say there because I don't want to spoil too much.
I'm getting Neil Gaiman vibes, and I adore Neil Gaiman, so I am sold. I'm sold.
Oh man. That's why I'm so hesitant to like tell people exactly what I like to write because I want to like savor it. And that was kind of like another like little tangent question. When you're writing and you're like finished it, how how difficult do you find it to like contain the urge to like not spoil what you've written and like save to like the very end?
Um, it's not that hard because I have a very tight knit group of people that I let read my stuff before it's ready to go. But I'm incredibly open. I just say it, and I am very much one of those people that I don't worry about other people stealing my ideas because, quite frankly, everybody could have the idea of Harry Potter. It could have been thrown out there, and nobody's
Right.
going to write it like Rowling. Period. It's just not.
That's true.
Um, so I don't mind that. I like to make sure that I hold the secrets of the story close to the vest. But as far as premise wise, I am always very open about it and I like to talk about it. Um, so I don't really have a hard time keeping it from people. If anything, they probably get tired of me talking about it. But it's I really enjoy it, and a lot of the people I'm talking to are other writers and other authors. So I share, they share. I'm sure you know that. We
Oh,
sit down, we
definitely.
talk shop, and people look at us like we're crazy as we're talking about
Hmm.
these worlds like they're more real than the world we're in.
Definitely. And also saying, how can you remember a story so complex in your head? But it's like, well, we're always thinking about it. We're always editing in our heads. We're
Mm.
always trying to figure out what else can we do? Can we change this? Or can this character go that? It's a gift and a curse because our brains never shut off.
Never. No, it is constantly running. I'm always up at 2 in the morning and I kind of do like the Da Vinci thing. I stay up and then I sleep for a little bit and I stay up and I sleep for a little bit. So I have this kind of around the clock, mentality. And I find in the dead of night, that's when the inspiration comes. During the day, I tend to edit it. I think about it. I do the things I need to do so that I can be ready for the next morning where I sit down and write again.
Nice. And kind of leaning into that, I know for we as authors, we always have like this initial promise we set out for ourselves and also for our readers that I promised my readers that this is going to be a very interesting book. It's going to be different from the other stories that I've written. So, what promise are you making for your readers for every book you have written, and has your promise changed in the process of the editing phase?
Like in general or specifically to each book?
I think in a very general sense, like a very general promise that this is gonna be like different from my other stories, or this is gonna be a very good read, or
Okay.
something in like a very general sense.
Yeah, for sure. So everything I write is in the same universe. Think Marvel. You know, every story intertwines in
Right.
some way. There is not anything I write that does not tangentially touch something else. And that's like a weaving type of situation that I really love to drop these Easter eggs in everything. They all intertwine. So I promise that you are going to find references to future books and to past books and to different series and different genres in every single book. So I think that's really fun, and that's something I always like to promise. I also promise you are going to learn something. No, it's not going to be school, but you're going to learn and take something away. That's where my history is. I can't really help it. It just drops in. I don't intend to do it. I learn while I'm reading and while I'm writing. And I love that. So I can promise you that I'm learning along with you. I also promise that you are going to have fun. The dialogue is going to be believable, and it is going to be snappy, and you're going to have one-liners that you can put on a t-shirt.
Nice, nice. So for the works you have published and the works like have in the process of writing, but you've, as you said, you've let your small group know what you're writing. What has the overall feedback been like? And it's going to be a little challenging question. Do you remember the first review you ever got for a work, published or unpublished?
Ooh, okay. So I am very fortunate to have an amazing group of writers that I talk to and work with. And the overall consensus has always been very positive. I'm very open. I like to hear everybody's opinion. I am always the deep diver. I'm like, tell me more. What can you do? What do you think is going to happen? Because I definitely am one of those people that wants the feedback. I might not always take the feedback, but I think all feedback is important.
Right.
I am very much a someone who can take some criticism, and I want to make it better. So even if somebody says I love this story, I'm like, but what would make it better? What do you wish would happen? And I like to incorporate that. So I've always been very open to dialogue, and I've been extremely blessed that people seem to really like what I do. So it's very humbling, and almost makes me feel a little, I'm always like a little bit shy when they're like, oh, I really like it. I'm like, do you really know? So the feedback has always been very nice and very useful. Now, as far as my first review, I cannot think of what it would be, but I can tell you what it was for the current book that's being read right now
All
with my
right.
betas. And my good friend who is reading it, who is a very accomplished author in his own right, Paul Heron, he has graciously said that he has not been this glued to a story in forever. And he is devouring it, even though he technically doesn't have time to do it and he's doing it as a favor. I think he's really, really enjoying it. And he has told me, this is great, and I'm not blowing smoke. So you hear that kind of thing from somebody who is quite accomplished himself, and that's always really nice.
Definitely, yeah. I actually remember the first review I got for my book, which was published on Inkit, and I worked on The Gathering back in my undergrad, which I want to say was 2017. And I put aside, I didn't work on it for a long time, almost 5 years. And then when I went for my master's degree at San Francisco State, everything was good. I was focusing on my classes. Then the pandemic happened and we had to be sent back home and everything was online. And it's like, well, what am I going to do? I need to keep busy. So I remembered I have my old story. Let me redraw up the outline again. I began working on it. And in less than 6 months, I finished out the first draft. I posted it on Inkit. The first review I got saying, oh my gosh, this is like Lord of the Rings. I was like, wow, that's quite a big thing to be compared to like a
Yeah.
titan of like the fantasy genre. It's
Hmm.
quite a very, very impactful feeling, but it's like, wow, people actually like this because
Hmm.
I don't want to spoil too much of it, but think of Magnificent Seven crossed with Lord of the Rings with space travel and characters from history.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty much what you get.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And this actually is another question which I always like asking myself, but also like asking my guests is, in the writing process when we're writing and we have those blackout moments, it's like, why do we continue doing this? I mean, this is like a very long process because, as I said before, writing is a very lonely career. You're giving a lot of hours into a project. You don't know if you're ever going to finish it because you may keep adding stuff down the road, which makes it a lot longer. So for you, PL, in those moments you've had like those blackouts or like those days that you don't want to write, have you ever thought, yes, I should do this. This is why I should write. What motivates you to still push yourself to keep writing, even when there are days you probably don't want to write?
There are a couple things. One is my very good friend, G. Michael Hoffs. He has kindly challenged me to a writing competition, and every day we compete with each other to see who ranks each other on word count. That's something that keeps me going. Something else is that to me, you don't have to be writing to be writing. Whether I am watching Love Island, which I have told people before, it's like reality dating shows, that is like my weakness. Like it is so bad, but it is fodder for fiction because how many different personalities do you have? You can watch the interpersonal relationships. It's just, they're so rich. So I will read or I will watch TV or, dating shows, or I will talk to my family or my friends, or I watch my kids, or I will go and just people watch. That's the stuff that gets me going. And as soon as I'm looking at something, all of a sudden it sparks, whether I'm walking through the woods or I'm in like a really crowded area. And as far as like continuing to write, I am a finisher. I am not somebody who is going to start something and not finish it. It's just my personality. People talk about being type A. I am type triple A. It is insane how intense I can be about this. And particularly since this is something that is like, I feel like it's a calling. It's not a job. It is something that I am supposed to do. It is something that I need to do. And I am very intrinsically like motivating for myself. I don't really need a lot of outside sources. So if I don't write, I feel lousy. And if I feel lousy, then it's because I didn't write. So I need to find something to either work on or edit. And it's just a matter of finding time, which is one of the reasons why I get up at some ungodly hour when everyone else is sleeping, because you have to find the time.
Yeah, that's actually just like me. I actually work a lot of the days, like almost Monday through Friday, and my only time to write is like late in the evening. I'll write for like 2 to 3 hours, almost like midnight, then I'll
Yep.
stop. But yeah, it's like when I write, you get like lost in like your words. It's like that's also the good thing too, because it takes your mind off of like the day and you can just focus on this. Writing is very therapeutic. It takes you away from, the hustle and bustle of what you did through in the day. And it's kind of very fun. And there's often a phrase I always like to tell my friends who are just starting into writing, who don't know, like, what to write. And I think you may agree with this or may have a comment on this. It is write drunk, edit sober. And I love that phrase because just put everything down and then edit with a clear mind, because that's honestly the best thing to do. And I'm sure you can agree that you probably have met and known a lot of friends and fellow writers who have like an idea in their head but can't get it down on paper and just like focus so much. And I just say, just get it down the paper. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be like in complete sentences. It could be like a hot mess, but at least your idea is down on paper. So then the next day you can write with a clear head, you know?
That's interesting. Yeah.
And another kind of a fun question I always like to ask my guests is like, you've mentioned before that your teacher was like a big role model into you going into writing, but who would you say is your role model author or authors growing up, and have they changed over time?
Ooh, okay. Growing up, it was Shakespeare. I was obsessed with Shakespeare and moved to Jane Austen. I was obsessed with Jane Austen.
Ooh,
My first novel that I wrote, I was 16. It was a Georgian romp. I threw everything at it. It was Jane Austen. It was Bridgerton. It was all of these things. And it was a lot of ideas, like you were talking about, a lot of ideas. Um, and as I moved on and read more, I did not grow up reading fantasy. I did not
really?
really like fantasy growing up. I was, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Lord of the Rings, and it really wasn't my thing. It was funny. My dad, I always give him credit for this, and he deserves it because he was the one that introduced me to urban fantasy, and he reads it himself constantly, fantasy and sci-fi. And eventually I caved. I guess it was 18 months ago I caved, and I read the Dresden Files, and I was hooked. Jim Butcher, and then I moved to Benedict Jacka. Then I moved to V.E. Schwab, Neil Gaiman. These are the people that really helped me hone in on what I wanted to write, because I don't write urban fantasy in the sense that a lot of people write it. I write it with this historic
Hmm.
mythology approach to it. And I also add a lot of drama, which is where my dating shows come in. So a lot of almost like soap opera. There's a lot of interpersonal relationship I feel like is missing in so many fantasies, where it can be all about the journey. It can all be very epic. I don't write epic. I write small, stories that are
Right.
important, but that are not world altering necessarily. They're always very character driven. So anybody that is a character driven author is somebody that I will just dive into their work, and I always come away with something. And a lot of them are, not even just fantasy writers. Like you'd said, you can read nonfiction, you can read literary fiction, and they all kind of culminate when you allow it to be a part of your voice. The thing that I find a lot of people end up being too influenced by the people they were writing, and they write like the people they're reading. When I initially started, because I said I wasn't an urban fantasy writer, when I started reading Jim Butcher's stuff, all of a sudden I started finding I sounded like Jim Butcher, and I'm like, whoa, gotta pull back, cannot do this. So I started adding in a lot of the older things that people had already read that I hadn't. And now I read, but I'm not reading for influence anymore. I'm just reading for the fun of reading because my voice is really strong and I don't want to dip into other aspects anymore.
Right. Right. And kind of like almost like a tangent and two tangents. Now, you've mentioned urban fantasy has been like
Mhm.
your main or one of your main genres to like writing. Um, for those who are unaware of that subgenre of fantasy, what
Mhm.
is urban fantasy?
Urban fantasy at the heart is going to, and it originally started as it had to be an urban setting. And what that means is that the setting really is of character. It is part of the story. If you picked it up and tried to put it somewhere else, it's not going to. And in urban fantasy, such as like Jim Butcher, you'll end up with a warlock or a wizard that is involved in the regular world. He's a part of the real world, but he's also really a part of the magical world. They intertwine. They are not necessarily, he's kind of like a bridge point between them, and that's usually what I do as well. Um, but it can be a lot of different things. It can be a noir, it can be a portal fantasy. Um, so it's, and more than anything, if I had to boil it down, it's got to be that urban setting, that city setting has to be as strong as any other character in the book. It needs to be a driving force.
Hmm. So it almost sounds like have you heard of the film on Netflix called Bright?
No.
I think that kind of boils down to what you're saying. So, for those who don't know what Bright is in the modern world, the real world, as you said, but the difference is you have humans, orcs, elves,
Mm.
all living together. Magic is real, but they literally just go about their day-to-day lives. Like you have orcs that are in the police department, elves that are the chief of police,
This is it.
and
Yeah.
their biggest concern is, magic has been outlawed or it's now become a myth. And which is
Mm.
funny, the orcs believe magic is myth, but they themselves at one point were thought of as just myths. Yet now they're
Mm.
just living in the real world, which I know a lot of people said when the movie came out. So does that mean that what happened in our history, they were also a part of, like the Alamo, World War
Mm.
II? Did
Yeah.
these guys actually exist during these time periods? They really didn't go into detail, but it's very fascinating because urban fantasy, I think, is now starting to come into the forefront a lot more.
Mhm.
And it's honestly a huge melting pot of different ways. Because as you said, it could be a noir, it could be a time portal, it could be an alternate reality. It is very fascinating. And another kind of tangent question, which is for the different genres and different authors. Have you heard of Brian Jacques' Redwall?
No.
Oh, you would love it. It's actually a really great book. So I always say it's Game of Thrones for children because it kind of is in terms of like, don't get attached to your characters because they're probably going
Mm.
to die or go missing. But it's this world, this fantasy world, but it's all animals. There's no humans.
Mm.
And they act very medieval. You have the badgers of Salamandastron. You
Mm.
have the mice of Redwall, which have an abbey. They have almost like a church,
Mm.
but it's not like based off religion in our time. It's pseudo based off of medieval religions.
Okay.
And it's just very fascinating. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is, as you said yourself, you didn't read fantasy growing up, but your dad kind of pushed you to read it. That was only the same thing for me. Like I read Redwall and said that it was a great story, but I really wasn't into fantasy as I am now. But from
Mhm.
reading those books, those kind of branched me into the genres that I'm in now, which is fascinating. So ultimately, that I just wanted to make that little point because I just love talking
Yeah.
about Redwall.
I gotta check that out.
Definitely. And I think your family may love it because it's actually a great, great read. It's phenomenal, easy to read, a lot. Their books are very small and they're quite big. They're about like 600 pages, but they're
Oh
a
wow.
great, great story for like middle school and maybe elementary into middle school.
Okay. Very cool.
Nice. And ultimately, the main question I did want to ask is, for all of your years of writing in the different genres that you have worked in, who do you write for? And what I mean
Mm.
is, a lot of authors who I've always asked that question is they write for themselves in the sense that if they saw this book, they're going to pick it up. So,
Mhm.
do you write for yourself or do you write for a particular audience in mind?
That actually depends. Typically, I do not write for anybody. I write for the character that shows up in front of me. Characters
Hmm.
come completely formed with names and interests and no world attached to them. So I will put them in a scene and their world falls into place. If I had to say who I write for, I write the story that I want to read.
All
And
right.
it's not like I'm setting out to write the story I want to read. I think that my subconscious knows what I want to read and it shows up. I do not write to market. I think that that's a recipe for disaster because, quite frankly, if you're writing to market today, you're 3 years behind. You need to be writing what's next. You need to do the next best thing. It's like in fashion, you see fashion runway shows, and what is on the runway right now was in design 2 years ago. So
Right.
writing to market is extremely dangerous unless it's a matter that you're writing for a genre. But if you're going to say, hey, orcs are the next new thing, look at all these orc shows, you're going to be behind. You need to be thinking about what's next. Stop worrying about what everybody else is writing. Stop worrying about what everybody else is reading and write a freaking killer story that people can't help but read. My audience technically is fantasy. And I have people that absolutely hate fantasy,
Hmm.
despise it. They pick up my book and they're like, oh, this is so awesome. It reminds me of this like romance genre, or it reminds me of a thriller, or it reminds me of Da Vinci Code, because these elements are all inside and wrapped into the urban fantasy that I write. So technically, I guess I'm writing for a new audience. I want to start my own subgenre. I want it to be an urban fantasy slash historical fiction slash thriller type of thing. So I don't really worry so much about what other people want, because I write for what the story needs. And if you start trying to take your story and adapt it for what you think is going to be popular, then you're probably not being true to yourself or your characters or your story.
Definitely. I 100% agree. My friend, Raven, who has her own indie publishing house that specializes in Gothic literature, she 100% like agrees, because writing for the market is, depending on if you know what the next trend's going to be, it's good. But if you don't, it's bad. And even if you do write for the trend, that's a thing. It's a trend. It's not going to last long, just like fashion. Instantly, it may be popular for like a week, if not, even if that long. It may be popular for like a few days, and then the next thing's going to go. So yes, I 100% agree. Writing for a trend is not the best, because you're not true to yourself, because you're just trying to pump out a product that may not be your best work. And people say, oh, this is the most amazing thing. But to yourself, it's like, well, is it though? I mean, I just did it on a whim, just because I wanted to be a part of like the market thing. And that can kind of be defeating for any new author that wants to go into this position, because that kind of gives a sense that I didn't really test myself. I didn't really push myself. I did something that was very safe and something that was going to get a lot of traffic.
And quite frankly, the people that you know as famous authors were not writing to market. They were writing for themselves.
Right.
Tolkien did not write to market. Stephen King, I mean, the horror is Stephen King, right? I mean, how do you even tear those apart? J.K. Rowling, she started a whole genre. You know, these are the people that you remember. These are the people that took risks, because quite frankly, in a sea of all normalness, that's not going to show up no matter how good you are or how great your story is.
Right. And I 100% agree. And I think just people just need to like take time to just write. Because I always like to say, and maybe you also agree, J.K. Rowling was unable to publish her book because a lot of the publishing houses said, no, this isn't going to sell. It took her 10 years, if I'm not mistaken, to actually get it published. And look at it. It's still the most popular book series in the world. And that goes for a lot of other authors too. So I definitely say write for something that you actually enjoy. If you enjoy it, take the time, because it's a marathon. It's not a sprint.
I agree.
And kind of leading into the audience, do you have a particular reader in mind, in the sense of this guy's more in depth to the audience? Because, you know, as readers, in us ourselves, we are kind of like fast readers, slow readers, or character driven readers, or setting driven readers. For you in your writings, do you have that in mind, or do you just see that from the reviews that you've gotten from the people saying, oh, this person's really into the character, so he's a character driven reader, or this person really likes the saying that I made, he's a setting driven reader?
Um, I guess if I was going to pick my avatar reader, it's my dad. My dad is in his 60s. He has been reading this forever and ever and ever. He listens to it on audible.com. So he listens to
Nice.
audiobooks. So I'm listening while I'm writing, I'm thinking about the dialogue. I'm thinking about, how does this sound? Does it translate? Can I see it in my head? So I don't necessarily take an idea and say, hey, I'm going to try to write toward this person to please this reader. Quite frankly, I think it just falls into its own. And since I am a really deep character driven writer, I don't ever start with plot. I only ever start with character. Immediately, really lucky. I get a lot of that stuff. I get the world building. I get the characterization. I get the snappy dialogue. All of these things live in the world of the characterization. So it's kind of a hard question to answer because I think that I write what the story requires. And since my approach is always character, did I lose you? Since my approach
Oh,
is
no, here
always
you go.
character, that I think it really, somebody is going to find something in it that they like. If they like the detail, the detail's there. If they like the visualization, it's there. So I really try very hard to separate my story and what it needs and what my characters need from what anybody else thinks, because that, quite frankly, it's, you know, they're not writing it, the characters live in my head, and if I'm not true to those characters, I'm the one getting knocked at, you know, not knocked
Right.
at like midnight saying, you know, you did me wrong here, like go fix it. So I guess in the end I'm writing for my characters.
Nice. That's actually a very interesting answer because you're actually the first one to actually say writing for my characters. A lot of the guests I've had, I've usually been like writing for like a particular reader or someone like them. But you're the first person that said I'm writing for my characters, which I think is very interesting because I've never really thought of that. You know, you want to honor these characters because you brought them into the world. If they're not authentic to your original vision, you kind of did them wrong. You kind of did them dirty.
You did. Yeah.
Yeah.
I told you
So
I'm weird.
yeah, hey, it's fine. You know, writers are. Oh, here's a question I always like to ask my guests whenever we have this great discussion. Is I always say that writers are liars, cheaters, and thieves. What are your thoughts on that? And do you know why I say writers are those three things?
I do not think that is what a writer is. I think a
Okay.
writer is not a liar, a cheater, or a thief. I think a writer, a true author, someone who is called to do this, is authentic. I think they are honest to themselves and to their story. And I think that they make promises to their readers that they know they're going to keep.
Hmm. Okay, now that's two for you. You're the first person that's actually disagreed with that. And I like
I'm getting
when
kicked
that
off, aren't I?
question.
You're like, end of call. We're not doing any more of this.
No, though the reason why I throw that question in is because when I heard that the first time, it really made me think. And I always like asking authors this question. And I remember what this other author goes like a writing panel at like a library in my area, and they said the reason why writers are liars, cheaters, and thieves, and they broke it down. Says we're liars because we make stuff up that's not true. We cheat people out of time, and we're thieves because we always steal from each other because, as the author said, the same story has been told so many times, different ways, different interpretations, but the same general story or stories have
Yeah.
been told.
I want to get this guy on the panel or this lady on a panel. I want to debate this person. Whoever you are, find me. We have to have a debate. I
Oh
could not
man.
disagree more with any of that.
Really?
Yeah, I
Okay, nice.
totally disagree with that. I think that it is a present, a gift to your reader that you're giving them an opportunity to escape their life. You're not cheating them out of time. You're only cheating them out of time if you gave them crap to read.
Oh
Sorry, I don't know
man.
if I'm allowed to say that.
Hey, you're fine. You're fine. Actually, you're the hey, go nuts. I mean, if you want to like have a little moment here to just say, go ahead.
No, and yeah, I mean, in the sense that you're writing something that hasn't happened, okay, but you're not saying it's happened. You're not saying this is a real story. This is a nonfiction story. You're saying, guess what? This is a fiction story. You're telling them immediately that it isn't real. And if you're writing true to your characters and true to yourself, it has happened to that character. When you're in that, that is authentic. That is something that really, truly, in the minds of the story, did happen.
Right. Nice, nice. And as you always said yourself way early in the beginning, you have a small group of people that are reading your books. So besides that group of people reading your stories, are you yourself part of like a writer's group where you collaborate with others in sense of like you review like someone's work, You give
Mm.
feedback, or you're just a part of a group that just loves to write?
Um, I have tried writing groups.
Mm.
I am technically a part of Atlanta Writers Group. Um, I do not adhere to writing groups. I don't like them. I think that if we're going to be in there and we're going to talk shop, then let's do it. But I do not like the idea of handing our stories around and asking each other for suggestions because to me,
Mm.
that's not being authentic. You know your story. Now, if you're stuck with something, believe me, I like pick up the phone. I'm like, help me. I call my friend, G. Michael Hoffman. I'm like, help me. I'm stuck. Talk me off the ledge. But it's never, hey, read this and tell me what you think of it. Because it's not for him. It's not for me. I am writing so my characters don't drive me crazy. I am writing for them to tell their story. And I feel like writing groups, I think there's a time and a place. And I think they're really good for new writers to learn the craft and work with other people. But when you get to a certain point that you don't need that anymore, then I think it becomes more of a collaborative environment and less of a critique group.
Right.
I don't really adhere to critique groups. It's not really my thing. I've tried them, and I feel like more often than not, I walk away and I'm more confused. You have
Mm.
7 different opinions of people that don't actually know the story, and then you can get really lost in the weeds. And
Right.
if you're going to if you want to be and maybe this is it, maybe it's the difference between a hobbyist and a professional. A hobbyist,
Mm.
go have fun, talk to your friends, make stories up together, read each other's work. But if this is your career, quite frankly, you don't have time. You need to
Right.
be knocking these books out. You need to have the confidence. You need to know your story. You need to know your craft well enough that you don't need to ask somebody else. But
Right.
that's just my opinion.
That's actually really good. The difference between like a hobbyist and like a professional. Because like you just said, a hobbyist could like do this for fun, for like, it's probably a group, like a meetup that like once in a while
Yeah.
to like talk stories, like ideas. But if you're a professional and you're part of like a professional group, like of like a reading circle that
Yeah.
you've known for all these years and
Yeah.
and you're all authors, then yeah, it is a work. You are trying to get this story printed. And I think it's a very good distinction between someone that's doing this for fun and someone who's trying to make this into a career. I like that you
Yeah.
make that distinction.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So we're nearing the closing statement. So there's 3 last questions, and they're probably my 3 favorite questions. The first question is, what are your biggest inspirations when it comes to your writing?
In what way?
In the sense, so for me and myself, like my biggest inspirations come from a lot of film historical dramas because I
Okay.
love the imagery of battles, and a
Mm.
lot of the people who I've had over the years in my circle, they say the one thing I love about your stories is you are very detailed and imaginative when it comes to the very descriptive battles of like soldiers fighting, shields
Mhm.
clashing, the actual brutality of this battle. Because that's just for me. I love historical dramas, and I love
Mhm.
movies from like the 50s and 60s and to now, like El Cid, Robin Hood, Russell Crowe, Kingdom of
Mhm.
Heaven, a lot of Chinese films,
Mhm.
Red Cliffs. Those are my biggest inspirations when it comes to
Okay.
like characters and storytelling. So for you, and kind of almost that regard, or maybe something different, what are your biggest inspirations when it comes to your writing?
Um, I like cinematic.
Hmm.
I'm very interested in the cinematography behind it. Not to say that it's the same at all, because if you're writing like you're a camera lens, you're going to crash and burn. You can't do that. But you
Right.
can still see it in your head. And I will close my eyes and I will picture it and I will start writing. And film is definitely something I'm driven by that because I'm a very, very visual person.
Right.
I am definitely I appreciate a good debate. I mean, this type of thing is inspiration for me. Sitting down
Nice.
with others that agree or don't agree, really debating anything. I'm um, I'm fascinated by how people's minds work. Reality dating shows, yes, that is my guilty pleasure. I love The Bachelor, and I love the drama because I hate drama in my own life, so I want to watch somebody else's drama. But I'll tell you, if there's not drama in my book, that's boring. It's also not real. It's not authentic. And
Right.
I recognize that I have one very small view. There are so many other types of views and people and backgrounds that I personally can't understand. So the best way for me to do it is to watch it even more than read it. Because if you're watching reality shows, and I don't know if you watch any of them, but something big will happen. Somebody will do something to make somebody mad, right? And
Right.
then they take them and they put them in this little room and a little chair and they're like, tell us about what happened. Definitely say like the internal dialogue. I love that because I think that's the psychology that people actually want. They think they want the story, but they don't want the story. They want the author's voice and they want to understand humanity. That's how these stories started. You go back and you look at Homer and the oral traditions. It was all about teaching each other things. It was about learning how dangerous it is outside and what can happen to you without actually going and doing it and putting yourself in danger. So those
Right.
are the types of things I think about.
Nice. Or if you're like me and you watch like last night, I actually watched like the last 9 minutes of Robin Hood, Russell Crowe, the beach battle on
Mhm.
YouTube, and I don't look at the video. I just hear the noise and I'm imagining what the
Yeah.
characters that I have in my head are actually doing and actually trying to replicate the sound. Or if you're like also me, you're also doing the emotions based off the sounds, and that's how I
Yes.
see make the fights for my stories.
Oh my gosh. I pull the weirdest faces when I write. I actually have I have a Instagram post about this. I'm like, please don't tell me I'm the only one that pulls these ridiculous faces. I'm like, thinking about it. And I get into it and I'm like, so it's all about like expressiveness.
Right.
And yeah, and that's when you know you're in the zone.
Definitely, definitely. My next question for you, and this one's a really important one. Um, in this journey of yours, who have been your biggest supporters, both professional and personal?
I have to say, first and foremost, it's my family. My family is incredibly supportive of what I do. And I know that there are many, many writers out there that is not the case. I feel incredibly blessed that they are supportive of me in general. I have had a lot of academic support
Hmm.
with my theses and my classes. I've taken some workshops and gotten some really good feedback. I have a really great network of people that I can go to right now. Like honestly, if it was not for G. Michael Hopf, I would not have been able to rewrite my book in 2 weeks. That man, not only is he, if you don't know who he is, look him up on Amazon. He is prolific. He has 40 plus books in less than 10 years, or like 10 years. He's written over 40 books.
Right.
Really, really good. He writes in a different genre, which I think is really helpful. He writes westerns and
Hmm.
dystopian stuff. So that is very different than what I write. His style is very different. But when you're able to sit down and talk to somebody, at the core, all of this is the same. We're still doing the same thing, no matter whether we're writing romance or we're writing epic fantasy. Like it's all the same process. And like you had said before, this is a very individual process. Personally, I don't mind that. I really like being by myself. I'm very much a lone wolf in many, many cases. And but when I'm ready to sit down and talk to somebody and do stuff like is this is driving force for me. Even just
Right.
talking to you, you reaching out to me, like that, it was a boost, right? Like I was like, this is so cool. I'm so flattered. So I really think that it is more than just the person that's sitting down reading your book or the person that says, hey, you can do it. It's the culmination of people offering their expertise and their time and just generally like chatting and putting out content and really feeding the beast that is the writing community because it's very much a community. We're all
Right.
individually doing it, but we're all kind of moving toward the same goal, whether you're a hobbyist or you're a professional like Stephen King. I mean, we're all in the business of telling stories and making people feel something.
Definitely, definitely. And here's probably the most important question I love asking my guests, and the answers have been mixed and they've been varied. And that question is, have you ever had a sense of validation from your peers in the writing community, in the sense that when you've published a work and you've gotten reviews and feedback from your peers saying, we like what you're doing, you belong here? Have you had that sense of validation, or do you not think that authors should look for a sense of validation from their peers and say, write for you, don't write for others to get a sense of like, you've made it?
Right. Okay. So that's kind of a complicated question. I have absolutely been validated by my peers. It is
All
a
right.
wonderful feeling. It feels so good. Like, I'm not going to lie. There's nothing like somebody that you respect coming to you and saying, that was good. And understanding, not just saying it was good, but saying, this is what I got out of it. And you're like, yes, this is what I wanted. This is what I meant. This is what I was going for. There's a boost there. At the end of the day, you can't write for somebody else. You
That's
can't
true.
write for your friends or your peers to read it because they might not honestly have time to read it, even if they would love to read it.
Right.
It has to be an intrinsic thing. It has to come from you. And the validation is in the completion, but it was funny. I finished this book and it was a rewrite, and God help me, like I threw out over half of it. I went change my POV from my female character to my male character. Had to start basically over, write the whole thing in 2 weeks and get it to the editor. And yes, everyone was cheering. We saw the Mario movie, from, after, we did it. Like everybody was excited. And I remember looking around going, I really thought I was going to feel something, right? Like there was
Right.
that 1 second of high of like, yes, I have it. It's ready to go. And then in like 2 minutes, it was okay, cool. Yeah. So
Okay.
now I need to go work on the book that's been pounding in my head and move forward. I remember saying to my husband, I thought I was going to get really excited. And he's like, you didn't get excited because you're a professional. This is a job. It's like any other profession where you've finished your project and your team is cheering and everybody's happy you've made the sale or you've created the product and it's wonderful and it's gotten a lot of attention. But then what's next? Right? I mean, you need to move on. So
Right.
I finish something and it propels me into the next thing. So I always have two running, one that I'm writing, one that's in editing, and it's self-propelling, it's self-sustaining. It's not something on the outside that I need somebody to come and clap me on the shoulder and say, job well done, because I should know if the job is well done, because I would not put something out that I didn't feel was well done or that I wasn't proud of. So at the end of the day, like you can't wait, you can't write for your readers, you can't wait for the critics or other people to come and tell you that you're good. You know if you're good.
Right.
You know if you've done a good job, and that's not being narcissistic to say, heck, this worked, this is a good thing. And because if you can't self-assess when you're good, you'll never self-assess when you're not.
That is true. And yeah, I 100% agree. When I finished my first book after 6 months, I was like, yes, it's done. I got to go on to the next one. I got to keep busy. I literally did the next one. It was shorter, 21 chapters in like possibly 3 months. And after, but yeah. So only as I was saying, I almost like you, I didn't stop. I kept writing and writing until I'm like now working on 2 books simultaneously. Well, I'm now considering I should probably stop, work on only one, because the lore for both is just hurting my brain.
Yeah.
Yes. So now we're reaching the closing segment of the interview. And my ultimate final question is, what is your word of wisdom to other authors who want to transition from the hobbyist to the professional?
Oh, well, I think that knowing craft is a really good place to start. That does not mean that you need to go pay somebody and get into a program. It does not mean that you need to sit down and read every single crafting book out there. Just start somewhere. Writing Excuses, the podcast, was one of the places I started. They cover so much. It's free. They're fabulous authors themselves. They know what they're talking about. You can get a great deal of knowledge from their podcasts. Read. Writers write, but they also read. And if you don't have your voice, the best thing you can do is read in it's a very wide, like read widely, right? Read a lot of genres. And practice. You're going to write garbage and you're going to keep writing garbage. And then one time you're going to stumble on something that's good. And share it. Don't keep it to yourself, even if it's bad. Find that one person, right? Find that one person who will say to you, yeah, I get it, but have you tried this? Someone that's a safe environment, but that's not going to just tell you what you want to hear, nor are they going to tear you down. Enter the community. Watch people on Instagram. Watch people on YouTube. Watch interviews like this and see that the people that are professionals that are successful to any degree started out as people that wanted to be writers. You didn't just wake up an author. One day, Stephen King wasn't published. J.K. Rowling, you were talking about that. Like, it took her how long to get published? Just because you're not published doesn't mean you're not an author. It doesn't mean that. It just means that either you haven't tried or that it's not the right time. Don't give up. Never give up, because I get tired of hearing you're writing somebody's favorite novel. Do you know how much pressure that is to tell somebody who is brand new that you might be writing the book that changes somebody's life? Okay, well, maybe, but more often than not, right now you're not. Right now,
thank you for adding to my anxiety. Thank you.
Exactly, right? I mean, it's like, talk about freaking pressure. No, just entertain somebody. Figure out what you want. Figure out your technique. I write character first. There are plenty of people that do not write character first. They write plot first. They write setting first. You cannot take a formula that works for somebody else and make it work for you. The only way you can learn what works for you is by doing, listening, and reading. Read what worked for successful people and try to implement it. Then try to implement things that are opposite. Eventually, you're going to find your way.
Definitely. 100% agree. And I think with that, everyone, this concludes our author interview. Now, before we do close out on this wonderful session, I want to say thank you to P L Riven for joining us. PL, thank you so much for joining us today. Where can people follow and engage with you and learn about any upcoming projects you're working on?
Sure. So I'm on all major social media. My primary is Instagram. It is PL Riven _author, PLRIVEN _author. I am on Facebook and LinkedIn. I think you found me on LinkedIn.
Yes.
I am on Twitter as well. You can also go to my website, www.plriven.com. And I have my link tree, which is linktr.ee/PLRIVEN. And I post a lot of writing videos on Instagram, and I do a lot of really cool and funny little comic book stuff, like comics that are writing related almost exclusively. So, follow me there, and I appreciate this so much. Thank you very, very, very much for asking me to be on this podcast. This was wonderful.
Thank you, PL. Thank you so much for being a wonderful guest. And listeners, thank you for enjoying this content. Please make sure to like and subscribe for more content, and a little shameless promotion here. Please make sure to check out my debut novel, The Gathering, which is available on Barnes & Noble. It's my very first one, and I hope you enjoy it. And stay tuned for the next episode. This is The Wandering Scribe, signing out.